Hello? Yeah. So I think the interesting part of the session that we're going to have today is very much in conjunction with what we had from expert classes yesterday. So we talked a lot about AI and also what its relevance in HR tech is. But there's much more to AI than just one particular segment, which is HR tech. And just to talk about what AI is, artificial intelligence in itself is a sense of a computer program which is actually taking in a lot of data to determine the output of what it's going to present to us. And that itself means that it is kind of mimicking a lot of our human intelligence in every aspect of what we are seeing today. And a lot of adaptation, recommendation systems, predictive analysis that is coming out of AI. Now, what it actually takes us to the next question, which means that will artificial intelligence at any point in time replace human beings? And what should we do about it? Is it something that is near? Is it far? That's what we're going to be talking about. And also when we talk about it, the last question in the earlier session was very much relevant to what we are going to be talking about. In terms of legal complexities, is there a framework? What are the ethics around using AI in today's session? So with that, I'm going to welcome JAIDEEP Reddy, who is partner at Trilegal, to demystify some of the legal ethics related topics for us. And is there a legal framework that we should abide by? So welcome, JAIDEEP.
Check. Thanks, Priya. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm a partner in the technology law practice of Trilegal. We're a full-service law firm. I'm just going to, I have a very short presentation which will just give an overview of the issues, and then Priya and I will chat about them. And I do think the session dovetails into the previous one quite nicely, which is inclusiveness in technology. So there are a few different things to think about as far as the legal and ethical issues are concerned, right? The first one is, we were just speaking about them, which is deep fakes. So some of the things that have been in the news are obviously the morphing and nudity of some of the celebrities and issues that leads to. To a large extent, existing laws do cover some of those issues. We have laws around impersonation, around obscenity, etc. So we do have existing laws that cover them, but obviously every new technology creates more complexity around it. You also have issues where, for instance, Virat Kohli's very realistic image a video was shown, superimposed over an Aaj Tak clip to make it look more believable, where he's endorsing a gambling app which will make your returns manifold. And if one just looks at it without the background of the news story, it's quite believable. And so seeing is no longer believing, I think, is the headline. And that impacts things like, even in legal cases, your evidence, a video evidence is no longer maybe has as much sanctity as it did. The copyright issues are also something that are very interesting. You have the New York Times, which has sued OpenAI for using data from the New York Times for its input. So the question comes as to, when a large language model like ChatGPT reads a variety of content and then comes up with something new, is the act of reading, so to speak, copyright infringement, or is it akin to human reading? These are some of the interesting issues that come up. And then, of course, who owns the content you generate out of an image generator or a text generator? As of today, a company like OpenAI gives you the right over it, but then at the same time, you've seen the US Copyright Office deny copyright protection to users on the ground that the user has not really put in enough effort. You're able to generate a sophisticated image in just a line of text. Is that the same amount of effort that an artist put 20 years ago or 100 years ago? So that's another dilemma. Bias, of course, a topic very close to this conference. So human bias is getting propagated within AI, and that has come out in studies on in the finance sector. So, for instance, higher interest rates for communities of certain racial profiles, or bias against resumes of women when evaluating for technical roles. So these kind of issues have come up when AI has been used, and the key point to think about here is AI comes with that sometimes veneer of objectivity as opposed to the human decision making. One has a first impression that this is a machine decision and so is objective, but of course we should question that. And then finally, on job security, there was a huge strike in LA, I think last year, where artists and writers protested against the potential threat of AI to some of their livelihoods. So for instance, an entry-level actor starts out as a background actor, and some of the proposals which use AI would say that you take a scan of the person, and then you don't have to call them back again because the video generation technology is so sound that it will be able to create that person's behaviors in different situations and make them say things. So a person gives a one-time scan and then they're out of the picture, as opposed to having a livelihood where they actually act out those scenarios. So these are some of the questions that are coming up, and happy to chat over them in more detail.
Sure. So I'm going to touch upon each of them a little bit in detail. So we talked about this generative AI, and a classic example is the ChatGPT. And whichever field of work you are in, I'm sure you tried and tested and try to ask a few questions which are more funny or which are more relevant to your work. And being in the space of research, in a way we consolidate the research. And when we asked for a certain report, we actually got very close to what we wanted out of ChatGPT. So how does it all work? Like, is it magic? I mean, while we want to believe it, there is a lot of content that is being generated out of this ChatGPT or other generative AIs, and we should question as to where the content is coming from. So I want to ask JAIDEEP in terms of who owns the content produced by generative AI for us and our customers, and also how is this ownership protected?
Sure. So traditionally, copyright has been based on the effort involved, and that's the reason copyright as a concept emerged.
Sure.
That there's this doctrine called sweat of the brow.
Yeah.
So the author puts in sweat to create a work,
Yeah.
and then the state therefore says that in exchange for the labor you have exerted,
Sure.
I grant you a temporary monopoly over this work.
Yeah.
Now the question is, as I was saying, with a single line prompt, which is really a collaboration between the user and the maker of the generative AI.
Yeah.
Right? Because the maker of the generative AI has also put a lot of math effort into it,
Sure.
where they are able to take a prompt and make it a full-fledged work.
Yeah.
On that ground, some of the IP offices in the world have started denying protection purely to the user, saying that the user is not really done enough.
Yeah.
Now that will of course play out in court, and we'll have to see how that does so. Potentially, is the user and the company a joint author of the work? That could be an idea worth thinking about.
Yeah.
But also the companies, in their terms and conditions, do assign the right to use the work.
Sure.
to the user. And so it really becomes a question of, has the user done enough in their prompt engineering to really say that they've put in enough effort to own the work, so to speak.
So is there any live example in the recent times that you face something like this?
It's just starting in a couple of cases.
Sure.
In India, there was a recent press release by the government saying that existing law covers the issue already,
Okay.
and there's no need for a new law.
I see.
So we'll have to apply existing principles of law, which really are have evolved in a different context.
Sure.
So how they evolve in this context of prompt engineering is something quite open-ended.
Yeah.
But hopefully we'll handle the first few of those.
And if you go to one of the ones, I think recently in the Hindu, that is as in the newspaper as early as last week, there was a tweet that was published where it was said that the music composer A.R. Rahman actually tweeted the song Timiri Erda, I hope I said it right, from a Tamil film, Lal Salam of Rajnikant. And he said that he recreated two voices, and the two voices were of Bamba Baikya and Shahul Hamid. So what's news about it? I mean, you can always recreate voices. But the unique part of this whole thing is that both of these people do not exist on this planet. So they were dead sometime back. So Bamba passed away in September 2022, and Hamid actually died in 1998. And if it comes to this, then you think about ethics and then their families and their emotions. While it was well remunerated, their families, and also they were consented, but I think there is a big argument within the in the industry whether actually these kind of voices can be cloned. So is it ethical to clone voices? And one related, and you talked about it a little bit in terms of deep fake. I wouldn't call that as this one, but related topic. And how do we protect the human connection and creativity using AI tools?
Sure. Interestingly, there's a similar example where a voice was recreated without permission. Right? So that becomes the real tricky area where you could create a new song with a new song, new tune, new lyrics, but the same voice, right? And then is there a right or a copyright of a person over their style of singing or over the timbre of their voice, etc., as opposed to traditionally copyright recognizes the tune and the words, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, the law recognizes the likeness of a person as being something protectable. It's called the right of publicity.
Okay.
So using a voice in a different context is something that is likely to be difficult without permission.
Sure.
And I think there was I think a Western instance as well where somebody made Kanye West sing a song of their own, and then it got pulled down. So,
So that's very much of non-ethical, but ethically, what do you think? Is that cloning voices is something that should be done, or
it's a tough
one.
Copyright on it? It's a tough one. It's also like how a few people have created chatbots of near and dear ones who have passed away to try and recreate their revive their memories and recreate their likeness.
Sure.
It's more questions than answers for me.
Yeah, sure. Okay. The other one we talked about a little bit are the hidden dangers of bias. As I mentioned earlier, a large portion of AI is basically based on the data. So if there was a bias introduced, then it kind of stays unless you're consciously removing it. So how do we identify potential risks of any kind of unfairness and discrimination? And what if the data size is insufficient for proper training? Because much of these algorithms have to undergo a training. But when it comes to that, it's like, is there a limit in terms of looking at the outliers and seeing what needs to be done? And if some groups have been overlooked or excluded, so how do we protect that?
Sure. And interestingly, now there's an overcompensation risk that is coming in, where some models are giving out output which overcompensates a potential bias. So,
sure.
Traditionally, what we've seen so far is that translation programs give out certain gender stereotypes, right, while translating. So and image generation. So if you put in doctor or lawyer, often it was giving a male kind of output.
Sure.
And if you give nurse, it was often giving a female kind of output. In an effort to kind of compensate that, some of the outputs which are coming out now are, for instance, if you do founding fathers of the US, some of the outputs that were coming were black people, or Vikings were black people. So it's a question as to how does the developer of that program really in a math-based, it's ultimately a math-based endeavor, look to shape the direction of that, and ultimately it is a human bias or counter bias which is playing out, and how much should the developers really intervene in those outputs?
Sure. And I think the video that we saw was really, really scary, in which if you think about it, everything that we have right now in terms of our privacy is at stake. So basically, the environment of automation and convenience, productivity means a lot of data. So unless you have that precisely, you can't really predict anything or have any recommendations. So when you look at AI, I think it's a lot of surveillance, employee monitoring that is happening. And much of everything that we are doing, we are only able to do because we have that data to support the algorithm. So in this kind of circumstances, how do we lower the risks of unauthorized access and any potential data breaches?
Sure. I mean, I think the popular solution, which also makes sense, is something called human in the loop, where the AI can assist in decision making, but humans are involved in the ultimate decision. So there were instances where delivery drivers were being surveilled by AI, by the supervisory organization, and for skipping a couple of signals they were terminated. Right? Whereas the human in the loop actually believed that they would have disagreed with that decision because the driver had a great track record, and that it wasn't justified in that case. Right. So pure AI decision making without the human in the loop may be where the more pitfalls arise, as opposed to using it as a assistive tool.
Sure. Okay. So you are saying that human in the loop could be a stopgap solution in a way.
Yeah. I mean, because there's also an interest in using the technology to save time and cost, which I don't think will really go away.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, on these tricky issues of bias and ethics, which really humans are best placed to make for all the pitfalls that we have. We don't want it outsourced to math, at least as we stand today.
Sure, yeah. And I think one last topic may not be the least interesting one, but it's very important to look at jobs in terms of whether AI takes away some of the jobs. So one of the things that I was reading is where McKinsey and Company quoted that automation may cause a displacement of 400 to 800 million jobs by 2030. And we are in 2024, so it's really right around the corner. And resulting in is about 375 million individuals needing to transition into different job categories. So I think there was one element of, when you think about AI, everybody looks at it as the job, kind of losing jobs, but I think there are also a lot of advocates who also say that there are new jobs being created. So in that sense, are there legalities around what job categories can be automated and what cannot?
So far, there are no legalities, but the way this has been looked at is as the next industrial revolution, where a lot of, for instance, factory line workers' jobs at the turn of the century were automated. Calculators also actually disrupted a lot of jobs where people used to do those. Similarly, switching of telephone lines used to be a manual process where you had to move the pins. Now the question is, I think there will be some protectionist measures in the interim to avoid a large displacement. You also have unions already coming up, and I mentioned the LA strikes. I have a friend in LA who said the city basically shut down for 6 to 8 months because of the strikes. So people are anxious about it. But I think the only way is to go through it in a phased manner. I don't think it's fair to expect people to reskill overnight. But obviously then the state also has to facilitate maybe training and upskilling. And enterprises should also assist in pivoting people to different roles if AI is going to replace some of the roles.
Sure. So I was inquisitive to find out, I mean, in terms of technology and what the legal framework has been. So I did my bit of asking the questions. So open to any other questions that are out here.
And while we get questions, a narrative has been that existing law does take care of a lot of issues, and do we really need a new law is a question. The EU has introduced an AI Act, so the question is whether other countries should follow suit.
Does anyone have any questions already written down? Okay, then can we just have a mic there?
Here, there is one here.
Yeah. So a few years ago, we know that Taylor Swift lost her copyrights or her copyrights to her original album because her original record label sold it to someone she didn't want to have. So she re-recorded her albums with slight change in the voices and slight change in the tunes. So she now owns her Taylor's version songs of her old albums. So you said that if the data generated by this generative AI is owned by, let's say, the generator, like ChatGPT in this instance, and the one who engineers the prompt. So let's say in the future we have a audio generative AI, like a generative AI that can generate songs with an old audio or with another singer's audio. Let's say someone comes in the future and gives a prompt to ChatGPT and tells, generate Taylor Swift songs, but with slight change in these tunes, in these places and in these many ways. So who would own the rights in that instance? Would it be Taylor Swift, or would it be ChatGPT and this person who engineered the prompt?
Sure, thanks. Very interesting question. It reminds me of this new program by OpenAI called Sora.
Yeah.
Which is a video generator.
Text to video, yeah.
Yeah, so you can basically get a very copyrightable video with a one-line prompt, right?
Yeah.
Or erstwhile copyrightable. The question now is, have you put in enough effort to go to a court and sue someone else for using the same video on the ground that it's your copyright, right? And the debate now is that, for instance, in the example I gave, the US Copyright Office doesn't necessarily agree, though it would vary from work to work. But the reasoning would be, you haven't really put enough effort to get yourself a monopoly in this case, because copyright is essentially a monopoly to stop someone else from using the work. In the example you gave, I think Taylor Swift would sue you.
Okay. Okay.
I think a similar kind of a question. People have been mimicking celebs, so why is voice cloning such a big issue?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So cover works are granted an exemption by copyright law. So you can make a cover version of a song. But cloning a person's voice is, I would say, maybe less of a copyright issue and more of a right of personality issue. Yeah. There's a different right recognized by common law, which is a right of personality. So the same way you can, let's say you put a person's likeness in a video context. They may not really have copyright over that video, but they would have a right to say, you cannot use my likeness in the way you please, only I have a right. And we also have a 9-judge Supreme Court decision which says there's a right to privacy and autonomy, which would a person would like to use and say that you cannot use my name, voice or likeness however you please.
Sure. So I think we wrap up here. I know this is an emerging topic and legal framework is evolving around this topic. It's kind of evolving around us, and I hope that the session was useful to give you some insights into it. But JAIDEEP is around, so feel free to ask him more questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Priya. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists for such a thoughtful session.
Thank you. Another round of applause for them, everyone.